Happy New Year and welcome to All Out Coach. My name is Tim McKelshvili. I'm your host, and this first episode of the year is very timely and appropriate given the enthusiasm and energy with which we start our new year. You will learn about the true, real world prospect of living longer and better lives as a result of new advances in medicine and drug development from an expert in longevity and preventive medicine, James Peyer. He was our keynote speaker at the 2023 Medical Affairs Innovation Olympics in September. So, this was a great reason for me to also premiere a new series of podcasts on All Out Coach called Innovation Olympics Series, in addition to leadership, mentorship, company culture, and pharma, which you've been listening to or watching here on the show. So, we will highlight some of those unforgettable, important messages and share them in this format from this industry first global virtual ideation competition, now in its third year in 2024. That's sponsored and organized by Amida Pharma, Healthcare Analytics and Organizational Change Agency, with innovators from all across the globe and scientists who pitched ideas, who evaluated them, and who participated in this workshop. So that's one new series that you can look forward to. Another one you can expect this year is the In Weekend series as well, to also chronicle an online journal that I author now in its seventh year, which is intended to inspire people for the week ahead, for the work week ahead, and share lessons in leadership, in innovation, in healthcare and other industries, and organizational change as well, providing you different new formats, not just Q&A, but real conversations, as well as educational narratives as well. A little bit about this episode. James Peyer is CEO and co-founder of Cambrian Bio, which is based in New York. He has dedicated his entire life to finding ways to address preventive conditions. And he tells a very personal story in this episode for why he is so passionate about preventive medicine. He founded the first global longevity focused venture capital firm called Apollo Ventures prior to becoming a CEO at Cambrian Bio. It had investments across Europe and the United States. And previously, he served as R&D specialist at the New York office of McKinsey and Company, with working with major pharmaceutical clients. He has a PhD in stem cell biology from the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center as a National Science Foundation Fellow. And he received his Bachelor of Arts with special honors from the University of Chicago. So I hope that you will enjoy the story that he tells from being a PhD to becoming an entrepreneur, leader, as well as two specific new cases, vignettes of pharmaceutical companies that have new preventive and longevity treatments already in human clinical trials. So I hope you enjoy this episode. Subscribe to All Out Coach and share it with your friends. It brings me great pleasure to introduce our first speaker to kick off our Olympic Games. James Peyer, CEO and co-founder of Cambrian Bio. He is a businessman, a scientist, a PhD in cell therapy, and someone whom I follow wherever he speaks. I make it a priority to be there when he speaks. I met him first at the Financial Times conference last year in London. And what comes across in particular is not just his interest in being successful or contributing to a successful organization, but his true and passionate dedication to the purpose of innovation. So, James, I pass the torch to you.
Hey, Tim. And
Hi,
hey,
James.
everyone. Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. Um, so yeah, this should be fun. I've been really excited about getting to take part in MAIO, all right, for a few months now, and it's going to be, I think, it's a cool way of setting up a competition and a great way, I think, to engage folks from all parts of the innovation ecosystem. And so to kind of kick things off, Tim asked me to come in and talk a little bit about the journey that I've been on in creating the company that I run, which is called Cambrian. And then also we'll leave a little bit of time at the end, I think, to talk, kind of go a bit deeper into some of the questions that come up, either from you guys on the call or, I think Tim and I had some things that we also wanted to dive into if we can. And so in the first part of the talk, I wanted to get through what I think are three sort of interesting interesting points. The first piece of like how I went from being a graduate student up to running this company, right? Kind of a bit of the entrepreneurial journey that I went on, um, and sort of the lucky breaks that I got along the way to get here. The second is how we've approached the topic that I am most passionate about, which is going after building drugs to go after the molecular damage that accumulates as we age. Basically, to build the first drugs that could be not just treatments, but preventatives for the chronic diseases of aging. And then finally, the most exciting part for me is to show a couple of vignettes of the science that we've actually done at Cambrian, and now some of the drugs that are actually in human trials that have kind of come up through the engine that we've built. So that's going to be kind of the 1, 2, 3, and then we'll do a little Q&A. Um, so I'll start without slides, just kind of like as an introduction sort of to myself and kind of how I got here. So my entrepreneurial journey in this, I guess, starts when I was pretty young. I was only about 15, and my grandfather was diagnosed with cancer. So he was in his 80s, and um, like many people in their 80s, they get diagnosed, they're already at stage 3, and he progressed really quickly, right? So despite any treatments that were available, or the treatments that were available, he was gone within a year and a half. And as I watched the medical system interact with this man, it was so continuously frustrating for me because every doctor that he would see kind of looked at this 80-year-old person and said, oh, well, an 80-year-old with cancer, there's no chance that this person will be able to get out of this, right? They are on their way to death. And as someone who had grown up with this man, I had seen him learn a new language in his 70s, and he was the first person I knew to get a high-speed internet connection, so he could do play chess online and do high frequency stock trading and all these things that I associated with like living life to its fullest. And yet, in less than 2 years, it went from someone really living a complete and full life to being eliminated, and the world around them seemed not to care, or just said, oh, this is an inevitability, this is just natural, like, move on. And I felt this like overwhelming repulsion by this, that there had to be something that we could do and had to be something we could do better. And so I got fascinated by how cancer forms, the type of tools that we could use to fight against it. And over a couple of years, talking to everyone that I could, I came to this conclusion that once a person, especially an older person, is diagnosed with a later stage tumor, for most of them, it's already too late. That you've got this Gordian knot of different things that have gone wrong in that person. And while there will be a few miracle cases of cancer being cured, really most people are going to die from their tumor. And if they weren't going to die from their tumor, it would be, it'd be because some other morbidity got them along the way. But there was this small group of like sort of outcast scientists, and remember, this is about now 20 years ago, that at the time were just working on flies and worms. that discovered that you could change just one gene, right? One gene in a fly or a worm and double the lifespan of that animal. And for me, this was such an interesting and powerful idea that if you could do something similar to humans, what would happen, right? If you changed the pace at which the organism aged. And over the next decade, as I decided to move into that basic science world, something really interesting and cool happened, which is we started transferring those discoveries that were originally in just worms and flies into mice. And I'm going to start sharing a slide here because what we found, there we go. What we found was that this worked in mice as well. Let's see, there we go. And so it wasn't quite this full of a picture 15 years ago. This is more of the picture today. But now there are more than 80 different interventions that you can either put into are either drugs that you can give to a mouse or gene therapies or other kinds of ways where you tweak the genetics of the animal that let them live longer and healthier. And how do you get an animal to live longer and healthier? Well, the way that it works mechanistically is by preventing the diseases that would otherwise kill them, right? And the big one in mice is cancer, but also there are lots of other things, including cardiac function and immune function and so on, that stay in good condition longer. And this isn't like a small increase in healthy lifespan. We're talking about, you can kind of see here, like 15, 20, even there are some that go up to 40% increases. And so think about how profound that would be from a human perspective, right? We live to an average lifespan now of about 80 in the developed world. And so a 30% increase in lifespan, that would be an extra 24 years. That would make the average human lifespan 104 average. And so, there's a lot more of a biological difference between a fruit fly or a worm and a mouse than there is between a mouse and a human. And we started making these discoveries as early as 15 years ago. And so at the time when I was in academia in this space, the big question was like, okay, well, now let's see if it works in humans. And so I'm going to stop sharing again for a second. And so that question of like, okay, well, how do we test to see if something like this works in humans seemed like a very obvious question, but turned into this barrier. And so as a student, I was talking to my friends who were making, discovery after discovery, extending healthy lifespan extension in mice. And I was saying, oh, well, like, when are the human trials going to start for these things? And they were like, well, we talked to some pharma companies, we talked to some venture capitalists, and we said, we've made this big discovery, but then they said they're not interested in it because you can't run a clinical trial for aging. So if you can't run a clinical trial for aging, there's not going to be profit in this approach. So go back to your labs and keep playing with your mice. And once again, that felt so deeply wrong to me because as I looked at these mice who were being prevented from getting not just cancer, but also immune senescence and frailty and memory loss and cardiovascular disease and all the other things that happen as we age, I was like, this is the most exciting phenotypic results that any person could possibly see from a mouse experiment. There's got to be a way to translate this to people. And so I took a hard left turn in my career, and instead of going into academic science, decided to figure out how to go into drug development. And so after my PhD, I jumped on board with a consulting company called McKinsey and helped them figure out how they would, or how big pharma companies acquire sort of late preclinical to early clinical stage biotechs. And as I saw that game playing out, I observed something kind of interesting, an interesting pattern, right? And if you go back, again, this is more like between 10 and 15 years ago, the big trend at the time was in immuno-oncology and in rare orphan diseases. And what little biotechs would do is they would say, hey, we're just going for this one disease, right? One specific rare type of cancer, one specific rare orphan disease, but the drug that we're building has potential to treat multiple types of cancer, right? Think Keytruda is a great example here, right? We're going to start with the super rare Merkel cell carcinoma, but then we're going to expand from that into almost every type of cancer. And I was like, why can't we do the same with these drugs that have been discovered by researchers studying aging? You don't have to run a trial for aging right away, but if there's one disease, right, whether it's part of cardiovascular disease, a type of cancer, even a rare orphan disease that is mechanistically linked to the drug that you're making that can prevent so many things at once, then you can get safety and efficacy and expand from there. It was a small idea, but it really caught fire among the academics in this space. And so I got the opportunity to leave the consulting world and start the first venture capital company builder to kind of help academics fund and create companies based out of their breakthroughs in this space. And now that's turned into what we call the longevity biotechnology industry, of which the fund that I started, Apollo, has about 200 million assets under management. And then the company that I left Apollo to create, called Cambrian, also has raised and deployed about $200 million into this space. And so what we've been able to do here is build not just a uh, not just a single company going after a single drug, but in fact, a whole ecosystem that that unites a whole series of different scientists that have made fundamental discoveries in translational biology that can be applied to these what we call the mechanistic drivers of aging. And we create a company with each one of these different academics that we work with that live underneath this umbrella that we call Cambrian. And we have our in-house R&D team, kind of a backbone operations team that handles finance and strategy and legal and all these sorts of things, as well as an in-house ventures team that can start up new companies, but also work with partnerships with pharma companies and others. And so we've created now more than 12 of these subsidiaries, and there's 10 of them below here. And kind of connecting back to the first part that we were talking about, every time I think about the last 4 years and what we've created with now 12 different subsidiaries developing 20 different drugs, going after all different aspects of aging. 15 years ago, I remember going to my my PhD mentor and saying, hey, I think I want to work on aging as I think that there are ways that we can slow down these processes of aging and prevent disease. And he was like, James, that's really interesting, but never talk about that in my lab ever again, because this was such an unpopular, unpalatable, kind of unapproachable target for any translationally minded lab or company to go after. But now it feels like it's completely the opposite, that we have a set of strategies and a set of molecules that are making this real. And so when I look at this slide, what it really makes me think of is more like this slide, which is now we have so many people, right? Cambrian as a whole it's the not just my dream anymore. It's the work and effort and dreams of more than 100 people who are all coming together to try to make this idea of creating new medicines to prevent disease possible. And I'm humbled every single time that I think about how many professionals from the pharma world, from outside of pharma, from nonprofits, have all kind of circled around this core idea and are dedicating at least this chapter of their lives to making it happen. And so the group of us have kind of been trotting all around the world. We were invited and got to talk at the New York Stock Exchange, which is there on the left side of the screen. Been talking to senators and congresspeople in Washington, D.C., which is in the top right, and talking with real leaders in the pharma world So the conference, the FT conference in London that Tim mentioned, where he and I first met, that's us down in the right, bottom right there. And so with all of this momentum and strategy and people behind it, I get to now kind of jump into the last part, which I think is the most fun part of chatting about this stuff, which is a couple examples of what we are actually doing to take this early stage science in our understanding, kind of the breakthroughs in how how different mechanisms change and decline with us as we age, to making real drugs. And so I'm going to tell you two stories if we have time. One is about a company that we founded called Amplifier Therapeutics, and another one called Velakor. So Amplifier came out of a discovery that was made by a husband and wife team working on AMPK, which I'll tell you about in a second. And they were studying this for over 20 years in the northern part of Sweden, in Umeå. And so AMPK, for those of you who may not be familiar with it, is one of the most important sensors in our body. And the thing it's responsible for sensing is when our energy levels, right? We produce ATP, which is the fuel that we use to run every process in our cells. And when our ATP gets used up and gets low, AMPK detects those low levels of ATP, turns on and coordinates a whole series of processes that we can probably recognize as the type of things that happen when we exercise, which is the most common situation that we get into of when we use up our available ATP. So activating AMPK tells your body to burn fat, boost your mitochondrial function to make new ATP, utilize more glucose, increase your blood flow, and it even initiates a whole suite of cellular repair processes. And so it's been known for now about 15 years that if you force AMPK to get activated in either a worm or a fly or a mouse, a few things happen. The first is that animal lives longer. The second, and I think more interesting thing that happens, and this is particular to mice, is that they start getting the benefits that you see from regular exercise, even if they're not being trained. And so a group at the Salk Institute in 2008, so this really is 15 years ago, found a compound that was unfortunately never suitable for human use. But when given at extremely high doses, day in and day out in the water, would activate AMPK a little bit and give benefits to heart function and endurance. And connecting back to our Olympics analogy, it was funny because after the Salk paper came out, the WADA, the World Anti-Doping Authority, actually banned this compound from use in the Olympics and the Tour de France and so on. And there have been a couple of cyclists, I think cyclists from Morocco, who actually tried to take mega doses of this thing to activate their AMPK and were disqualified from competition, even though unfortunately that early drug would never have worked. So in any case, so for the last 10 years, there's been this race to see, could you create an activator of AMPK? Merck, Pfizer, and AbbVie all tried really hard, poured tens of millions of dollars into creating these activators, but unfortunately, none of them have been both safe and effective, even in preclinical models. Until this group from Sweden that I mentioned, who found this drug, ATX 304. And I'm going to spare a lot of the molecular details for this conversation because this isn't what it's about, and skip almost right to the punchline, which is that they found this drug, which if you just give it to old mice sitting in their cages, not being put on any special exercise program, you can see the benefits of exercise in a once daily kind of oral pill, right? And so on the left, you can see after just a few weeks of taking this drug, the stroke volume of the mouse's hearts go up like 30%. The cardiac output also up by about 30%. And then on the right, I think is my favorite version of this experiment. It's just like the most clear, where without any special exercise training, after a month on the drug, these aged mice increase the amount of distance that they can run by more than a third. And at exhaustion, they have much lower blood lactate levels. So that burn that you get in your muscles, right? Their blood lactate levels are lower, even though they've run further. And this isn't just useful for cardiac output and exercise. The other big benefit of cranking up your metabolic rate is in fat burning. So another experiment that we've done here is you take, these are not aged mice, these are normal adult mice, and you put them on the mouse equivalent of a burgers and fries only diet, right? They're eating a high fat diet with or without the drug. And without the drug, in the red triangles over here, they gain weight really fast. In 2 weeks, they've gained 15% of their body weight. But if they have the drug, they actually lose weight, lose about 5% of their weight, but not any of their lean mass. And then we switched the groups. So we took the fat mice and put them on the drug, and we took the thin mice that were on the drug and took them off of it, let them go for a few more weeks, and saw that, the thin mice now, they will gain 40% of their body mass as adiposity, but the mice that gain 15%, they lose it all back, but again, not their lean mass. And so many of you guys might be familiar with the revolution that's happening now in treating obesity with the GLP-1 agonists. And interestingly and differently from how those drugs work, which is about they mimic this effect of satiety, right? They make you feel full and they reduce the amount of food that an animal will eat. With these drugs, because they're boosting metabolic rate, when the mice are on the drug, they actually eat more. It's just that they're burning so much more energy. They have so much more energy available that they still lose weight regardless. And so now this drug has been shown to be safe in more than 100 individuals, and we're in a proof of concept clinical trial in pre-diabetic, overweight, and obese patients. And so again, these are designed just to be like cute, cool little vignettes of how some really interesting science has gone through more than a 10-year journey to get to the point where it's actually being applied to patients now. And we'll have results from that proof of concept trial as early as middle of next year. And so this is kind of sort of vignette number one, and then I wanted to do one more vignette. Vignette number two is Velakor. And so this one also is a story that started across the Atlantic from where I am right now. This one started in Israel, in the Weizmann Institute outside of Tel Aviv, where a professor named Eldad Sahor was studying the regenerative potential of the heart and observed something really interesting that I think not a lot of people know about. I think it's commonly known that the adult heart, let's say when we have a heart attack, cannot repair itself, right? If you have a heart attack, you get a bunch of dead tissue and it forms a scar that kind of exists permanently in the heart. But when we're in utero, right, when we're very young, whether you're a human or a mouse, the heart will actually be able to repair, and the cells in the heart can regenerate. And so he was asking the question, what is it about the fetal or neonatal heart that is capable of regeneration that goes away as early as a few weeks after birth? And he found this protein called agrin. This is an extracellular matrix glycoprotein that was highly expressed in the fetal heart and then almost drops to zero right after birth. And with some really elegant experiments in mice, he showed that this agrin extracellular matrix protein was both necessary and sufficient for heart regeneration. Necessary because when you removed it from the fetal hearts and injured the fetal hearts of a mouse, they were no longer able to regenerate. And sufficient because if you added it back in to an adult mouse heart, you could get regeneration. And so this was a mind-blowing idea for us. The fact that you could actually get a heart that has just had a myocardial infarction to regenerate in a mouse was such a cool idea. But I'm going to hold up my finger now. You realize a mouse heart is about the size of my pinky nail, right? Maybe even smaller. And that's very different from a human heart that has a massive amount of dead tissue created when a myocardial infarction happens. And so in order to really test if this works, a mouse wouldn't be sufficient. So in order to get excited about it, we had to do this in the closest thing that could come to the size and structure of a human heart, and that's a pig. And so we took fully sized adult pigs and gave them myocardial infarctions. Basically, you do what's called ischemia reperfusion, blow up a balloon in the arteries of their hearts until they have an infarction event. And so you can see on the left here, when you just give the ischemia reperfusion, right, they just give them a heart attack, a huge amount of tissue in the heart will die. And then it will heal up in this white-looking scar tissue called fibrosis that forms here. And then with just 1 or 2 doses of this agrin protein, you can almost eliminate that scar tissue, and the heart regenerates to its normal state. And this doesn't just, reduce the infarct size, it also reduces the fibrosis when you were just looking at fibrosis, and it restores the function of the heart as well. So this left ventricular ejection fraction also is restored almost back up to the baseline after a heart attack. And so now that we have not just the mechanistic understanding, the mouse proof of concept, and now this pig proof of concept, we've also gotten ready to take this into humans as well. So as early as the end of next year, this will be treating patients with myocardial infarctions or heart disease. And so these are 2 different ways that I wanted to talk about that are kind of examples of how we've taken early stage research that was kind of discovered, and we got excited about it based on the effects of these genes in aging, right? And things that changed in animals as they aged, but now we're applying them to indications and diseases and building biotech companies that make sense in the here and now. So in any case, thanks for your attention, and I hope that y'all have a great time in the medical Olympics that are going to be unfolding over the next couple of weeks.
Thank you, James. Thank you very much. And so I want to welcome everyone to turn on your video, ask questions yourself, just like we did last year. And so as you're thinking about questions, I had a few in my, in mind, James.
Sure.
So, yeah. What are some considerations that you suggest for other companies that are developing preventive and longevity treatments in terms of their likelihood to receive regulatory path approval?
So we didn't talk too much about the prevention side of this, Tim, but as you know, like this is a really critical part of what I call the stepping stone approach to bringing these medicines to patients. Is that when you've got a medicine whose, let's call it its best and highest use will be as a preventative, the normal way that we get to prevention now is by first identifying a therapeutic use case, right? A disease condition where you can test first safety and then efficacy and actually get onto the market with your drug, and then treat prevention as basically part of an indication expansion sort of framework. So once you've got a drug that's safe, effective, it's either on or nearly on the market, then you can start running one of 2 types of outcome trials, or one of 2 types of prevention trials, right? One is the hard and long outcomes trial, right? This is how the statins were first approved for the prevention of heart disease, right? Yeah. By saying, okay, well, we're going to give some high risk people a drug and see how many heart attacks they get, see how often they're diagnosed with cancer, maybe a combination of those things. And then there are also a series of more function-based endpoints that you might be able to affect earlier, right? And that's more of a secondary prevention, similar to like, oh, well, we're going to lower cholesterol and we're going to be able to find a way to improve based on that. And I think that sort of 1-2 step of moving from first therapeutic to prevention has been the historical way that preventative medicines have gotten approved. And for hopefully for the better, the FDA is more willing to work with companies interested in prevention than ever before. And so we've really found the FDA and regulators to be a partner with us in thinking about these things, as long as we are clear with them that there is no tolerance for an unsafe medicine moving into prevention, right? The bar for safety just has to be so much higher.
Okay, great. Because I see quite a lot of new companies that are entering this field, longevity research, and I'm very encouraged by that, given where we are in our economic situation now, and how United States is very much known for a country that invests in rescue care, right, and that spends about 1/5 of our GDP in the United States is contributed by our healthcare, which is twice as much as anywhere else in the world.
Yeah, and I think that idea of moving from a sick care system to a healthcare system is one of the most interesting and provocative ideas in medicine and pharma today. And I think if we as an industry can pull something like that off over the next decade, that would be one of the most, I think it would be the most fundamental medical transformation since the coming of vaccines and antibiotics 100 years ago.
Yes. Well, I see Rob Adamowski typing something in the chat. Please don't be shy. It's a very unique opportunity here. Let's ask some questions. But I can continue, James, and ask you about what is the importance of distinguishing between health span and lifespan, and how should that impact our drug development strategy?
So, when I got into this space, the sort of collective term for a group of scientists studying aging was immortalists. And that never, I think, went over very well with the wider population, right? Because once you start talking about extending lifespan or whether humans even need to die and all of these sorts of things, you're really having a question that's more philosophy and science fiction than medical applications, right? Medical and scientific applications. We don't have any evidence to suggest that human lifespan could be increased to 200 or that people would not have to die or any of these sort of like far off things. I think it's been a really important sort of first shift for this field, and this has been something I've been hammering on now for 10 years, to say, look, extending lifespan is a nice thing to talk about, but it's not worth anything if you don't have health, right? You brought up that slide before, Tim, in your introduction about like the 4 different components of health, physical and mental and so on. And those are the things that really make life worth living and enjoyable. And if you lose those things, but you're still alive, not only are you a burden on society, but you're also probably not enjoying life. And so most people, I would say, if you talk to folks, most people agree that if you have to choose one, healthy for 100 years and then die versus healthy for 80 years and then unhealthy for 50 years, you would choose the first one, right? And so I think that's a shift that this whole field has gone through, to say, look, it's not about lifespan, it is about health span. But one of the things that Cambrian is leading the charge in doing now is actually taking it one step beyond that and saying, look, health span is also this kind of abstract, more societal idea. It's something I think governments should be thinking about a lot. How do we maximize health span for our population? But as we brought drugs from mice to now human trials, the thing that we're focused on is even more specific than that, which is on prevention, right? How do you keep people disease free of a specific subset of conditions? that occur as we age. And if you can prevent disease, right? There was some polling from the PPP, the Public Policy Polling Group, that was engaged by a nonprofit working on aging to ask a bunch of these questions. And what they found was that if you ask people if they would take a drug to extend their health span, about 50% of people say yes. If you say, would you take a drug to extend your lifespan, it's lower, like 25%. But if you ask them a question that says, would you take a drug if it could prevent cancer, Alzheimer's, and osteoporosis all at the same time, almost 90% of people said, yes, we would want a drug that does that.
Great
And,
example.
and I think that's both more in tune with the scientific reality of what we will be testing for in clinical trials, and it's what patients and people, really pre-patients, right, what people want. And so I think the closer that the messaging gets to both what people want and the scientific reality, the better that we will be able to make those drugs a reality for people.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you, James, very much. So depending on where you are, it may be early where you are in the world. So if you don't or you can't get on video, you can also use the chat. But we have time for one question, or maybe give James the opportunity to maybe provide us with a final message as well. One question I was interested in, James, was about some technology innovations and their impact on longevity, such as the biological aging clocks, continuous glucose monitoring. What is your assessment of this advancement?
So for those of you who may not be familiar with this, what Tim is alluding to is there have been a series of innovations in trying to look at the correlations of a specific set of biomarkers based on the epigenetic set of epigenetic methylation marks in blood, and how those correlate to a person's risk of, let's call it, all-cause mortality, or getting whether it's dying or even morbidities, right? Getting cancer or a heart attack or these sorts of things. And there seems to be a really good correlation where you can look at someone's blood and say, well, this person is either more or less likely than an average person to get cancer or heart disease or die in the next 10 years. The challenge with those things right now is that they've never been validated clinically. And so I look at them as like an early stage, right? When we had the hypothesis about cholesterol and started the Framingham heart trial in the 50s, we had this idea that this thing, then cholesterol, now what we call these biological clocks, could be useful in understanding and reading out physiology. And actual risk. And it took the Framingham Heart study and a series of other studies to validate that cholesterol was a risk factor for heart disease and stroke. Okay. And we just haven't done those studies yet. Okay. And so a lot of these things are now available as like direct to consumer tests. Very few clinicians are using them. There's a number of different ones, different algorithms, different ways of measuring, and there's a lot of variability there. So I think it's a space that we're going to see huge amount of innovation on over the next decade. But it's not until the first ones really start getting validated with either long-term outcome-based trials or randomized placebo-controlled trials that say, hey, look, you move the marker and you also move the outcomes, that it becomes applicable to widespread use.
Great. Well, thank you, James, very much. Please share with us any, any final comments, messages, or how you'd like people to, get in touch with you as well. And the floor's yours.
The only thing that comes to mind whenever I'm speaking or talking with a group of entrepreneurs or individuals who are like on the cutting edge of innovation is there are so many times in my life where I feel I've just gotten extremely lucky. And I've tried to figure out, okay, there's this old phrase that luck is where preparedness meets opportunity. And the one piece of advice I would give to so many health-focused entrepreneurs that I've run into is the biggest advantage that you can have is not shutting up about your idea when you're passionate about it. Almost every big opportunity that I've got or that has felt lucky has been because I, in every conversation, just like talk to whomever I can about this thing that I've spent my whole life working on. And sometimes that will make me come off as like, a little bit obsessed and socially awkward and like, why do you keep talking about this, James? But once in a while, right, like the chance I got to start the first fund that really launched my my entrepreneurial career was because I had dinner with this guy at a pharma company in New Jersey, and over a bottle of wine and a couple of lobsters, I told him about how my whole life was dedicated towards figuring out how to take these discoveries in mice about aging forward. And then fast forward 6 months, and that same guy calls me up and he was like, "Hey, you remember that dinner that we had where you wouldn't shut up for 3 hours talking about aging? Well, this guy just contacted me and said he wants to put money into aging research. And do I know anyone that might be interesting to talk to?" And like that connection was the random lucky connection that launched my whole career. And so it really came just by being passionate and talking about what I wanted to do and what I felt needed to be done at every opportunity. So that's my number one piece of advice. Shut up.
Great, wonderful. Well, all of you can connect with James. Those of you who may have not asked a question here in the chat in our Whova platform, our event platform that you're going to use. And James, please feel free to stay around. You're welcome for the entire opening ceremony here. We have some great speakers and expert panelists coming up. So
thanks so
you,
much,
James.
Tim.
Thank you.